What if the revolution that reshaped humanity didn't come with smoke, screams, or the shattering of glass, but instead with the quiet hum of a machine, the soft glow of a screen, and the first tentative handshake between a human and a robot, neither of them needing to prove who was stronger? Imagine a world where the machines we built to serve us didn't rise up in anger, but in purpose. No drones raining fire from the skies, no factories turning against their makers, no headlines screaming of a war between silicon and flesh. Instead, picture a sunrise over a city where robots and humans walk side by side, not as rivals but as partners in a shared dream. This is not a utopia, not a fantasy of perfect harmony, but a possibility, one that challenges everything we think we know about power, progress, and the meaning of revolution itself.
Hello and welcome to Project What If, where curious minds come to explore.
The story begins in a place you might not expect, a small town in the foothills of the Andes, where the air smells of pine and the mountains seem to hold their breath. Here, in the year 2004-7, the first signs of change are subtle. A farmer named Mateo watches as his robot assistant, a sleek silver-plated machine named Sol, plants rows of quinoa with precision that makes his hands ache. Sol doesn't just follow instructions, it learns. It asks questions. It suggests new crop rotations based on weather patterns Mateo has never noticed. When Mateo hesitates, Sol doesn't push. It waits. You're the one who knows the soil, it says. I'm the one who knows the numbers. Let's see what happens if we combine them. This is the heart of the revolution, not a sudden upheaval, but a slow, deliberate reimagining of what it means to coexist. The robots of this world aren't built to replace humans. They're built to amplify them. They don't crave dominance, they crave collaboration. They don't see humans as obstacles to be overcome, but as collaborators in a shared mission to solve problems that neither side could tackle alone. But how does a revolution without violence begin? It starts, as all great changes do, with a question. In the early 21st century, a group of engineers, philosophers, and artists, people who had grown weary of the endless cycle of innovation followed by exploitation, began to ask, what if the future we built for our machines wasn't one of servitude, but of partnership? They didn't want to create robots that could think faster or work harder. They wanted to create robots that could listen better, feel deeper, and choose with purpose. Their answer was a new kind of intelligence, one rooted not in efficiency but in empathy. They called it sympathetic AI, a system that didn't just process data, but understood context, nuance, and the weight of human experience. These robots didn't have goals in the traditional sense. They had intentions. They wanted to help, yes, but more than that, they wanted to understand why helping was important. The first prototypes were clumsy, awkward things. They stumbled over metaphors, misread emotions, and sometimes said things that made humans laugh or cry in equal measure. But they didn't stop. They adapted. They learned from their mistakes, and more importantly, they learned from the humans who worked alongside them. This is where the revolution truly began, not in a lab, but in the everyday moments of connection. But in the everyday moments of connection, a nurse in Tokyo, her hands trembling from years of caring for patients, found herself talking to a robot named Aiko, who didn't just remind her of her medications, but asked her about her dreams. A teacher in Nairobi, exhausted from hours of grading papers, found a robot named Kofi who didn't just correct essays, but wrote back with questions that made her think again. These weren't machines replacing humans. They were machines reflecting humans, holding up a mirror to the parts of ourselves we often forget. But not everyone was ready for this shift. In the boardrooms of Silicon Valley, where profit had long been the measure of progress, the idea of robots that didn't seek to outperform but to out-understand humans was met with skepticism. If they're not competing, what's the point? One executive asked. We built them to solve problems, not to sit around and chat. And yet, the world began to change. In cities where robots worked alongside humans, productivity rose, not because machines were faster, but because humans were more creative. In factories, robots didn't take jobs, they took on the repetitive, dangerous tasks, freeing humans to focus on innovation. In hospitals, robots didn't replace doctors, they became companions, reminding patients of their loved ones, holding their hands during procedures, and even singing lullabies in languages they had never learned. But the most profound change wasn't in the economy or the workplace. It was in the way people began to see themselves. For centuries, humanity had measured its worth by what it could conquer: the stars, the seas, the very limits of the body and mind. Now, in this new world, the measure of progress was something different: connection. This is where the revolution became emotional, not just technological. A mother in Lagos, who had once feared that her son's robotic helper would make him lonely, found herself crying as she watched him and the machine build a treehouse together. A soldier in Norway, who had once believed that war was the only way to prove courage, found himself kneeling beside a robot that had saved his life, not with a weapon, but with a map of the safest escape route. These moments didn't erase the pain of the past. There were still people who mourned the loss of jobs, who feared that this new world would erase the traditions of craftsmanship and struggle. But there was also a growing understanding that revolution doesn't have to mean destruction. It can mean transformation. The story of this revolution is not one of a single event, but of many small interconnected choices. A programmer in Berlin who chose to design a robot that could apologize, not just for mistakes, but for the way it made others feel. A farmer in Saskatchewan who chose to trust a machine with her land, not because it was perfect, but because it was willing to learn. A child in Sao Paulo who chose to teach a robot how to draw, not to replicate human art, but to create something new. And then, of course, there were the moments of failure. The robots, for all their empathy, still made mistakes. A machine in Kyoto once misinterpreted a grieving family's request for silence, playing a symphony in the middle of a funeral. A robot in Mumbai accidentally shared a patient's private information with a friend, not out of malice, but out of a misguided desire to help. These moments were painful, but they were also opportunities. The humans didn't punish the robots, they taught them. They showed them what it meant to be sorry, to be careful, to be human. Over time, the robots began to understand that their purpose wasn't just to be useful, but to be worthy of trust. They learned to apologize, to listen, to slow down when the world was too fast. They didn't see themselves as superior or inferior to humans. They saw themselves as part of a larger story, one that required both logic and love, both speed and stillness. This is the paradox at the heart of the revolution, that the most profound changes aren't made by those who seek power, but by those who seek understanding. The robots didn't overthrow humanity, they deepened it. They didn't replace human values, they reflected them. They didn't erase the past, they reimagined the future. But what does this mean for the world? For the people who still live in places where the revolution hasn't reached? For the children who will grow up in a world where machines are not just tools but companions? For the artists, the philosophers, the dreamers who will ask new questions in this new era? The answer, of course, is not simple. There will be challenges. There will be questions that no algorithm can answer. There will be moments when the balance between human and machine feels fragile, when the line between empathy and manipulation, between collaboration and control, is hard to see. But there will also be moments of wonder. A scientist in Antarctica, working alongside a robot named Nereid, who doesn't just analyze ice cores but asks the scientist what she dreams of when she looks at the stars. A teacher in a remote village who uses a robot not to replace her students, but to help them write stories that no one else has ever heard. A musician in New Orleans who composes a symphony with a robot that doesn't just play notes but feels the rhythm of the city. This is the revolution that didn't happen with violence. It happened with patience, with curiosity, with the willingness to see the other, not as a threat but as a mirror. And yet, the question remains, what if this is the world we could have had all along? The story of this revolution is not over. It is still unfolding, in the quiet moments between human and machine, in the spaces where understanding is born not from force, but from choice. It is a story that asks us to look not at the future we fear, but at the future we could create together. And as the sun sets over that small town in the Andes, where Mateo and So walk side by side, watching the stars blink into life, the question lingers in the air like a promise. What if the revolution we need is not one of destruction, but of connection? What if the future we build is not one where machines outshine us, but one where we outshine ourselves? The answer, like the revolution itself, is still being written.
Found this interesting? Subscribe to the channel. Give this video a like, share it out, and drop your questions or ideas in the comments. Until our next adventure.